Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Co-host today is Chris Rosini. Chris, welcome to the program. Well, very good. We have a couple things going today. Our main program, we want to deal with the credit ratings of the United States bonds. And the ratings are doing pretty good, but some of us think that maybe they're beyond, an accurate assessment of the value of those bonds. Often wondered about how anybody could buy a 30-year government bond as an investment with the conditions we have today. But before we do that, Chris, I want to mention a little bit about what is in the news. It's big news right now. It was all over the television yesterday. The way I look at it, it's a little bit of good news today, and that has to do with the North Korean president shaking hands with the South Korean president, and then crossing the DMZ. I did visit the DMZ a long time ago in the 60s, and of course remember very clearly the Korean War breaking out when I was in high school and all the nonsense that has gone on. But so in a way, this is pretty amazing, to see this happening. And they talk about, the two presidents walked across the border shaking hands and dedicating themselves to a peaceful peninsula, even denuked, which is a big question that's going to happen. But regardless of how this works out, and to say, well, let's look at the negatives and let's look at the positives, we don't know, but it certainly is a lot better than trying to out-demagogue each other the way it was going on about 6 months ago. But I think a lot of credit, goes to the people of South Korea for electing, Moon to the presidency, because he's the one that has been willing to work with the North Koreans. And I was happy about the use of athletics in politics, and when North Korea went into South Korea for athletic events in the Olympics, I thought that was great. And this was a follow-up, and it happened. Now I don't know I can't believe the neocons are ecstatic about this, but anyway, I think it's pretty good, and we'll certainly keep an eye on this. I'm sure you took a look at that, Chris. Did that make you a bit happy about seeing things moving in that direction?
Yes, I mean, taking it on face value, this is great, because the worst thing the governments can do is they can end human life on Earth. So this is a big step away from that. I don't think Jong-un is out of the woods. The U.S. still wants to control him one way or another. But from a perspective of wanting to continue to live, I think we're doing pretty good.
Well, I was kidding Daniel today. I said, well, maybe there's been somebody that was listening to the Liberty Report and moving in this direction. At least we do every once in a while hear exclamations and statements made, and a movement in the direction that makes more sense than just threatening each other. Anyway, I want to get into this rating system, and I know you know a little bit about this. All the rating agencies, and really the dilemma is, how can the United States be AAA? I know, after the last crisis, there was some question about, whether or not, and recognizing that there was some misrating. But we're talking about big ratings. Why does U.S. government still have AAA? I think we're spending a lot of money we don't have, like $1 trillion a year. But you shouldn't worry, Chris, because we have the conservatives in power. Or should that be the reason that we should worry? Because now it's $1 trillion a year, and the national debt, $21 trillion. But what about the unfunded liabilities? It's too hard to even measure that. It's $210 trillion. And we don't know how many people are going to work hard and pay into Social Security and all these things, or how strong the economy will be. Because, $1 trillion debt could be $2 trillion for all we know. So it is a big deal. But you've thought a little bit about this. What is it that makes you a little bit skittish about saying, oh, well, these credit ratings, we can't trust them, because so far they haven't been very helpful in warning us about other crises, especially, '08, and nobody came along with a rating agency and say, hey, look out, there's a lot of bad stuff out there. Most of the time we got reassurance because it was government checked it out, and we have government regulations to prevent these things from happening. Didn't quite work out that way.
Yes, we're at 21 trillion and counting, and it's rising faster and faster. I think just during Trump's administration, we've already added another trillion in debt, and everybody knows it's not going to be paid. We know, the government knows, the people that lend money to the government know that they're not. This 21 trillion will never be paid. But what caught our attention, Dr. Paul, is that we saw the headline that Moody's and Fitch reaffirmed their pristine rating of U.S. debt. So something is not adding up here, especially like what you mentioned, all the way through the housing bubble, those mortgage-backed securities, the credit ratings on those were all AAA, even as they were all becoming worthless. So again, I don't think we can take this as truth.
Right. And we speak with and visit with a lot of people thinking along our lines, so I'm not sure just the people we talk to reflects all of the citizens in the country, but the people we talk to, they don't buy into this. They don't buy into the fact that the dollar is going to be the king of the hill forever. Most of the people I see, especially when I go out to college campuses, even into other conferences, people are very much aware of this. And I think they're closer to the truth than the people who say, hey, don't sweat it. Debt is okay. I read that in my economic textbook. So I think this is a culmination of a bad economic policy. There's some shenanigans going on because they have to not allow confidence to be lost. You have to have confidence in the currency, confidence in the economy. So they're cheerleaders all the time. So this is what is going on. But there's other people who start to realize just the points that you put out, all the debt that is sitting out there. People are very much aware of that, and they're worried about it, and rightfully so, because they cannot depend on what their economic textbooks have taught. And that's one of the problems I had in trying to change policy in Washington was they weren't interested in that because I didn't understand policy, because I didn't understand Keynesian economics, and I didn't understand that deficits don't matter, this sort of thing. And some people think debt is wealth. Well, all that is false. And you don't have to just go back to, several years and look at what the Austrian economists were saying. You can go back to Adam Smith. Adam Smith was pretty good on deficits. He warned about this. And yet there's a conditioning that has gone on now, especially since the 30s, that deficits don't really matter. That sort of explains why once the people say, well, the people are concerned, so they elect Republicans. And Republicans are fiscal conservatives. Everybody knows that. I mean, we had that in the 80s. It was pretty disappointing, with the Reagan administration that they spent, and deficits skyrocketed, military spending went up, and it seemed like those of us who are concerned are worrying needlessly, and that these deficits, aren't that harmful. I happen to think that debt is very bad, and I think, Christopher, you've thought about this a little bit, but what's going to happen when the interest rates go up? And already they've started to go up.
I'm sure it'll be the same. It's always sunny in the United States. But, I don't have proof of this, but I have no idea. My guess is that these ratings agencies really don't have a choice. And there's only three of them that you're allowed to listen to: S&P, Moody's, and Fitch. And it kind of reminds me of ABC, NBC, and CBS, and all government licensed media. The government holds your license. So you'll say what you're allowed to say when government holds your license. If you step out of line, they can revoke your license. So I'm sure there's something with these ratings agencies too, to where they have to keep this AAA rating no matter what, because the U.S. you don't want the U.S. government coming after you.
No, and the other thing is most people in the world, even those who criticize us, don't want to see the collapse of the dollar. They have an interest in the dollar. They get really disgusted with us for the advantages of printing the reserve currency, but they don't want to just destroy the dollar overnight. And I think the ratings are participating in the propaganda of governments. The inflation rate the true inflation isn't nearly as much as the reported inflation rate. But they don't give a AAA rating to a 30-year U.S. government bond. I have yet ever to meet somebody who buys a 30-year bond with the purpose of investing and saving money for 30 years so that they can take care of their kids or buy a house for their kids, in a few decades from now. I don't think anybody does that. It's all propaganda, and then these bonds are traded, and the bond traders make a lot of money. So if the ratings were changed, that would affect all of that. But if they come up short and you need to buy some of these bonds, the Fed, behind the scenes and secretly, can make sure other banks and other governments and other central banks have the so-called dollars in order to prop this up. So the gimmick is to prop it up. It's propaganda, and I think the ratings have to be there. Let's say behind the scenes they've done some ratings, and the rating has to go drastically down. That would be very, very bad. But in some ways, even the ratings can't be perfect. There is a subjectivity in the value of a currency and the value of bonds, and that's why news frequently will change interest rates and change the value of the dollar. And there is an element that if you get into trouble, the value of these bonds and the value of the dollar will go down. So it isn't just the amount of money they're printing. That is basically very, very important, the creation of money and the distortions they cause. But if you want to go one step further, it's really the deficit is the problem. That is the most, that is the biggest emphasis on why the Fed prints so much money. They have to accommodate. They accommodate, guess whom? They accommodate the liberals' welfare state and the Republican welfare state. And they run up the debt. That's how they stay in office. So this will be very interesting. I wished it weren't so serious. It's really like a game they're playing, and it's such a serious game. How long can they get away with this? Because they're powerful. They have the power of the purse and the power to create money, the power to declare war or fight wars without declaring war. All these things. But can the market be more powerful? I think it can be, and sometimes you have to be patient. And I think about the patience that some of us had knowing real early on that propping up the dollar at $35 an ounce of gold and claiming the dollar was worth that much in gold, it was all fiction because we printed like crazy. And especially Austrian economists knew it wouldn't work. Matter of fact, Henry Hazlitt said from 1945 on, when Bretton Woods was started, it can't work. It finally broke down, and then it broke down, and we've had a lot of chaos. We've been on this fiat dollar standard, and it's very precarious. But they've been able to do a pretty good job of lying to us and fibbing to us and trying to keep this together. But it's all with good intentions. You don't want this thing to fall apart. This is going to hurt everybody. Every single person who has money in the bank is going to be hurt. But the big problem is it best to hide the truth and let it be much worse when the calamity comes? Or should we tell the truth and start working our way out of it? Frequently, the truth comes out and they say, we're going to have this convention and this agreement, and they pass certain legislation that these rating agencies are wrong, so therefore we have to be careful, we have to cut back. But it never happens. I think the addiction to deficit financing is so great, and the theoreticians that have existed for 50 years, they said, yeah, you guys have been worried about that too long, and we always get out of it. Even in the '08 crisis, we got out of that, and look at the economy, it's booming. But I don't think the ratings can cancel out the reality of it, and that's why it'll be very interesting to see when it overwhelms. It's sort of like how to analyze what happened in the Soviet system. Mises was great. He said socialism doesn't work, the Soviet system will collapse. But nobody knew exactly when. Matter of fact, nobody, in 1988 says, oh, it's going to collapse next year. Nobody had an inkling, but finally it falls apart. So all these games they're playing, the games they play with the ratings and the propaganda and the reassurance and the fudging of figures will not overcome truth. And I think that's what we should be involved with, is trying to figure out the truth, because there's no monopoly on the truth, and there's no monopoly on timing for sure. Because even though they say we're 100% right on what is coming and this is all fake, that doesn't mean, well, prepare tomorrow, just to go into the mountains and start hiding because it's going to be bad news tomorrow. We don't know that and can't know. And all that I suspect is that we are not going to be weaned off it. It is going to end badly. And this is one thing that Adam Smith was good on. He said once the debt gets to a certain number, and we've breached it, is sovereign debt is never paid for. You can't pay for it, that it will be liquidated. And of course, our government and the system has liquidated debt steadily. So if the dollar goes down in value, if the dollar goes down, which it has, over the last 20 years or so, down 50%, well, the real debt goes down 50%. So that's liquidation of debt. The liquidation of debt, the elimination of debt will not be done by hard work and effort and it paid down. So the people who hold the debt eventually, get harmed. But it's all a game they play. And Chris, matter of fact, you better keep an eye on these rating agencies and make sure that they're telling us the truth.
Yeah, even on the downturn, and I agree with you, what has to happen is a bad financial crisis, unfortunately, but the truth is not going to come out then either. The entire way down, it's always, we're just turning the corner now, everything is improving. They've been saying that you could think of how they treat war in Afghanistan. We've been turning the corner for 17 years now, always turning the corner. That's a big corner that we're turning. So it's the same thing with this. It's always going to be better. And you could even go back to the Great Depression. The entire time, they're always telling people, now this is it. We've turned, whether it was Ford and the Rockefellers and the governments and union bosses, the whole way, if you go and look at what they were saying, it was always the bottom, and they were very far from the bottom. So, I mean, we could definitely expect that again.
Very good. And thank you, Chris, for being with us today. I want to go ahead and close with bringing up another item that comes about when you have a monetary system like that, and that is income inequality. That's a big item. I would guess that might be one of the biggest symbolic things going on right now that that draws attention to this. But it's a little bit more esoteric to talk about bonds and ratings and spending and all that. That's too difficult. But income inequality is a real thing. And the one thing that we have to do if we expect to come out anyway decently on this argument, because this is a big deal, but it's justified. What do you mean? We have free markets. Rich people can get rich. Not quite the way this has happened. The 3 richest people in the world have as much money as 50% of the lower class people. That's a little bit more inequality than comes about with free markets. Matter of fact, that only comes about when you have interventionism, inflationism, and government spending of money. You have crony capitalism. But the real argument is going to be the campuses are being flooded now with young people claiming that they are for socialism because look at what you guys did. You free market people, look at the results of this. If we don't refute this, that argument that free markets have delivered this dilemma and this discrepancy in wealth distribution, we can't win. People have to realize that crony capitalism has nothing to do with real free markets. Matter of fact, I don't even like the word capitalism because it was invented by those who didn't like free markets. We should talk about free markets, and crony capitalism is completely different, and it has to be refuted. And this whole financial system and dollar system and the debt that we have is all secondary to the crony capitalism, which is totally dependent on central banking and, in principle, our Federal Reserve. Guess what? That's the reason I'd like to do something very important, get rid of the Federal Reserve, and I think things would be a lot better. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.